If you like our content about training, then you'll love our programming too. Head to the notes below to grab a free week of general physical preparation. You get unlimited access to me and fresh programming every single week for less than $1 a day.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Hyperformance Podcast. I'm joined by me and Jacob are fully in sync today. Iced coffees, strength culture shirts. And our wonderful guest, he's got the bougie option.
Geez.
Actually, that's not a full-blown Stanley Cup. What are you rocking there? Staying away from those BPAs?
That's just an Amazon metal water bottle that's gone through a lot, as you can see. I'm a bit of a clumsy person.
All right, Jacob's got every drinking vessel. I've actually got the this actually gets me a lot of shout outs. People love this. People see me drinking out of this and like, hey, he's just like me for real. Anyway, this is some heinous fucking small talk because we're actually here to wrestle with one of the most important and complex and probably confusing topics for a lot of personal trainers, S&C coaches, especially when we're trying to maintain a thread of objectivity, when we're fucking studying human movement and when we're trying to develop human movement interventions and things like that. So Sam is heavily involved with the research side of human movement, trying to understand why we move the way that we do and how we can use that to make better training decisions. Or actually, am I speaking out of turn here? What is your primary goal? Are you trying to help inform training decisions? Are you just trying to sort of observe how the highest performers move? What is your perspective on it, Sam?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for having me on the show. I actually listened for a while back, and ever since I was small, I've always loved sports science, but it wasn't really a thing, like back in 2008 to 2010. And then...
How old are you?
I'm currently 27.
Okay.
So yeah,
More for context for everyone.
Yeah, so play basketball, and then I always I did the engineering route, that's the typical Asian parents' career trajectory. Found biomechanics in my third year. And I was like, wow, this is sports science with engineering. And it's all really amazing. And actually, in that very same year, I got an opportunity to do a sports science study with the England Institute of Sport. It was a master's student there looking at detraining and performance. And, how much does your strength decrease over a period of detraining? I was one of the participants. I didn't really detrain. I was still playing basketball, doing track rowing. I just wasn't lifting. And, honestly, I'm pretty bad subject. And I guess we'll get into the realities of doing human subject research. But all in all is to say, biomechanics, I realized, especially sports biomechanics, it's a thing that I can actually research and study. So as a basketball player, every basketball player ever, we all love to dunk. We all want to see how we can jump higher. And then that was also when a lot of jump technique discussions came to be, around the 2017 to 2020 area. And that was when I was thinking whether I could actually do it as a PhD. So the motivating factor was understanding for running jump technique, how it can help us jump higher, all of the buzzwords you see about specific cues, does it actually translate to better performance or not? And that's actually what led me on.
Hearing you say that,
yeah,
and hearing you say the date or the year that it was as well, was the catalyst for this mostly people criticizing Jake Tour's lack of long penultimate?
I think that might be before the time. I think the pushback...
Right, so it was pre that. What were some of the things? What were some of the things that people were talking about? Where you're like, I don't know if we're looking at this the right way, or was it just this general intrigue?
So there are a few things usually. Especially right now, I have 5 years of training. I'm a fifth year PhD student. So I've gone through a lot of discussions with both coaches, other researchers for multiple different movements, where it's what is the best technique, right? And people are saying, oh, you should almost always perform a longer penultimate or et cetera, et cetera. But there's a deeper layer to that. I wasn't quite aware of it. And the research field for running 2-foot jumps, especially with a basketball, in a basketball context, just doesn't really exist at all. There's one dunking study that was a stationary jump of one person that could already dunk is 6'5" or something. So usually in the dunking community, we throw that out the window. It practically doesn't exist. So it was pretty funny, actually. So I tell the story of how I met my professor. I was just considering to apply to grad school in the US, which requires a GRE exam. At the end of that exam, there's an option to say, do you want to be contacted by schools with that program? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? More options is better. I didn't really know how to look for a proper lab, to study this kind of questions. I just knew I had my curiosity. I had my questions regarding how people perform to running jumps and how it can help mediocre athletes like us jump even higher. And that was it. That was the motivation.
I mean, this is like research dollars are meant for like public health and general population, right? Like sports science should be for us. Fuck LeBron. He can just do whatever. Is that your perspective? Sorry, because I think it's really important to figure out what helps the normies. But also, do you think that there's much of a difference? Sorry for cutting off this wonderful trajectory that you're on, but I think they're important questions.
Yeah, so it's not only a perspective, it's actually a reality in terms of the distribution of funding. And if people do want to perform or pursue sports-related research, you almost always have to tie injury research to it. Therefore, you can apply for fundings that have health relationships. As we all know, injuries are highly linear and predictable. You see a measure, you obviously know injury is going to happen. That's why we should all get the money to do injury research, right? We all know how easy that is.
Does that frustrate you? Because that's one of my biggest frustrations, because I understand the intrigue into like how do injuries occur. Yeah. But it does seem like we're pissing a lot of money up the wall, but it's filling a lot of gaps in for me also, because I can see because there's a lot of this funding also coming from like the professional realm, because I imagine sporting teams, you're paying someone $50 million a year. It's like, if you can predict injuries or get people to return to play faster, like, of course, there's so much money in that.
Yeah, that's totally right. Even at conferences, when there's sessions specifically saying, oh, here's landing mechanics, and then they would be like, we thank the funding from this agency, and here's the research we did. Somebody stepped off a box and landed on one leg, and we see if their knees came in or not. And then that's injury risk. And I would just, in my first couple of years, I would lose my mind. But in the next few years, I just stopped going to those sessions altogether. And it's really a thing that for specific biomechanics researchers that know how complex and how annoying injury research can be to do, they just pivot away. They do more performance-related research. And performance, you can measure it more directly. And then you can also backtrack for like the KPIs, but in terms of biomechanics domain, which I'll go into in terms of like the system/model, how we can properly view movements better. But performance is just a lot easier to deal with, think through than injuries. And I think that's just the reality of both the research funding and humans.
And is this a shared opinion? Like, do you think that there's a growing community within the sort of researchers crowd that share this opinion? Or do you think that it's pretty unique, your perspective on this?
As far as I know, there are labs that's dedicated their entire existence to studying ACL, non-contact ACL injuries. There's throwing programs. And a lot of this, I don't think anyone would talk about it. It would describe it like this, but it actually comes from whether you belong to like a biomedical engineering department within the school system, or if you're with the sports science kinesiology side, because sometimes the logistics of where the lab is at determines what kind of research they can really do. Like, I'm the only one in my lab that's doing any sort of sports biomechanics research. All of my lab mates, they're doing clinical walking gait for older adult balance. Like that's quite common in biomechanics research as well. You can use the same analysis for different goals. But for one, you can very concretely say, these specific factors correlate or associate with performance way more than you can with somebody's balance state or forest, etc.
Interesting. Sorry as well, if this isn't related to just sort of where you ended there, but just along what you were explaining there, I had so many questions sort of come up in my head. Yeah. One of the things I think it's really curious is like we're all trying to be evidence-based and use the best evidence to inform our training decisions. And I thought it was funny when you were like, yeah, there's been almost no research on running 2-foot jumps, maybe like one study on dunking. Because even when I've had conversations about people when it comes to transfer of training of like different range of motion squats and stuff like that, people are like, oh, there's been heaps of research on the impacts of squat range of motion and vertical jump and squat range of motion and 40-yard performance. I'm like, actually fucking no. Like people just say that. Like no one's like actually fucking looking for it. And like, I don't know. There was one big study that I found that I think a lot of people are referencing. And like, when I read some of the results from it, I'm like, this sounds like completely fucking made up. This idea that like partial range of squatting took like half a second off a bunch of semi-elite college athletes 40 times. I'm like, fuck, what are we doing here, boys? Like, anyway, sorry, I'm just getting off tangent here. So you are looking at sort of fleshing out some of these initial sort of studies on running 2-foot jumps, or is it dunking specifically?
Yeah, so I guess just to touch on like my general research areas. So it was only supposed to be just dunking. That was like my main movement of interest. And like one of my first research questions is from a very fundamental perspective, how is dunking actually being performed? So that's something as simple as...
Do you give a fuck about single leg dunkers?
I mean, honestly, no. And
no,
I can justify it as with any academic would. I'll say it certainly places more demands on your lower limbs. Okay, it's actually more unforgiving on the body. Whether that's even before we get to say you're a power or speed jumper. When you only have one leg to redirect your body's momentum, and then to sort of generate all the braking forces to decelerate you and accelerate upwards, it's more demanding. And there's actually a couple studies that already did that. It was like looking at volleyball players doing 1-foot and 2-foot jumping, as well as just our favorite population, healthy college-age, active college kids doing 1-foot and 2-foot jumps. So another thing that's pretty cool, that'll tie into like the quote-unquote system I'll be discussing, is like 2-foot jumping. When you have 2 feet in contact with the ground, it affords you way more options to accomplish the task. So again, that's before we talk about like power or speed. It's just that the coordination of each leg, you have way more possibilities between peoples of different ability, strength, injury history levels. And it's more open to study. There's more things that could possibly be going on, but nothing is known about it. And that's just jumping without the ball. So my first aim is to say, okay, it's like our control group. Just simply run up, jump off 2 feet, touch as high as you can, right? And I do like a 15-foot run up, thanks to the PPA guy suggesting it as like a nice standard distance for NBA combine test. So that was
where's the 3-point line? Just to give everyone like a visual that they'll be familiar with.
Yeah,
do you know?
I think it's like 20 or so, 26, 25, 24. So
just a little bit in that.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a suppressed run-up. Like some might describe it as suppressed. You can never really get to full speed. And PJF Performance actually talked about it as being, it's not enough to see athletes express their full potential. But again, you can argue, like there's many arguments you can make, but then you can argue in the game, you also never get to have a completely full runaway, especially if you're at that level, right?
Was there many variance in how wide the 2-foot jumpers were, or does that not really matter? Like how close they are to jumping in, or how far they're...
You mean like their foot stance configuration?
Please side by side.
Yeah, so there's like, our question basically wants to understand, we describe it as the roles of each leg. In summary, during each leg's ground contact, what are they doing? How much backward forces, how much backward deceleration are they doing? How much upward acceleration are they doing? And whether there's distinct patterns where one leg is certainly doing a lot of this and the other leg is certainly doing a lot of that, right? We hear about the plant leg and the block leg. So it's like, how much planting is the plant leg doing? And how much blocking is the block leg doing? And to tie back to your question, Jacob, the amount of planting and blocking each leg does is very closely related to where they are positioned relative to your body. So the way it works is like, if you want to better generate horizontal deceleration, you want to make sure your foot is placed around your body center of mass in a way that will help you do that. So think about how when you do a, like push punch drill, right? You want to make sure your second leg or your like block leg is far in front of you. It's that positioning that's helping you to generate braking forces when that leg's on the ground.
Buzzword.
Braking force?
Now we got to get into that one.
Yeah, we'll get into that. I know less about running than I do about jumping. So, but basically, that there's like close relationship between how much force each leg generates in each direction and where they're placed. So that was like the main aim. So yes, we saw a variety of actually for configurations, because I allowed people to do, either left, right, or right, left jump. So whatever sequence they prefer, and reach with either hands. So it's like, it opens up, if I really wanted to go crazy with like the comparisons, I could. But I was sort of going off the assumption that maybe they're performing similarly, just slightly different sequencing. And that was generally what we saw with like the roles of each leg, the first and the second, the plan and the block. It's fairly consistent when you look over the entire ground contact time. So that's good. There's the plan and block, there's some merit there, but not exactly that.
Because when you say that there's two distinctive roles for each leg, and then I see my feet side by side, I feel like I'm not getting that. Not getting much of that.
No, that is Gus's right? And then I can say, here's all of these cool findings, and you'd be like, all right, how can I jump higher? I'll tell you to go jump. There you go.
You got to come get me in to do my bullshit jump in your lab. I'll give you some funny looking data. You probably just have to discount it.
So what's annoying from experimental planning side is like I have an adjustable hoop in the lab and force plates in the ground. And then that basically allows me to measure motion capture 3D of the body. So I know basically how your skeleton's moving through space. I don't know whether you're a wide or narrow ISA, but
there'll be signs.
Moving. Okay. And then I also know how you're interacting with the ground, each foot distinctively. And what I didn't consider is, what if someone jumps too high? So our hoop goes from 8 feet to 10 feet. And one of my first 6 participants, he's a 7 foot center from our school's team. And he's actually fairly athletic. So he actually had like the foot very close to each other and next to each other as he jumps towards the basket. But he was jumping so close to the basket and he can still dunk. And at that point, I was like, my research setup and questions just kind of got messed up a little bit. But then,
it's because he's not driving as much intention, because he knows that he can just get the dunk easy.
Right, and he's jumping so close to the basket, it's like a fadeaway dunk.
I think I do that. Yeah. Like being shit. And I think I need to start from further away, just like looking at my own videos and then looking at people who can dunk.
Yeah, jumping from further away is one of the hardest thing you can do, I think, especially as you're just building towards that level.
Okay.
Because usually, especially if you jump with a ball, like that's another thing. So my current project is looking at jumping with and without a ball. But like even before processing all the data, one thing that's very obviously clear is that people actually jump from further away when they have a basketball in their hands. And if you think about it, the task of a jumping without the ball is to reach as high as you can, right? You want to you tap your hand on the rim, and that means your apex is at the rim. But when you try to dunk with a basketball, your apex actually has to be before the rim for the ball to actually clear it, have any chance of clearing it. So either you do the same start of the run-up, but you take off from further away by changing some aspect of your penultimate, or you just start the whole thing, like 1 foot, 1 shoe back, right? If you think about the track and field measurements, just like maybe start 1 shoe back. That will at least afford you a possibility of more clearance. But you could also just miss the hoop completely and then, come down. So that's why I'm scared to jump from that far away.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to take a second to let you know that Angus has poured all of his knowledge on e-commerce and organic content into an ebook, which is now available. If you want to check it out, head to the show notes or the link in Angus's bio. Thanks.
Right. Okay. But would you say, are you noticing a pattern where the better jumpers are leaving the ground from further away from the hoop, or there doesn't really seem to be any pattern with that? No, I imagine obviously as you get better, it just opens up that possibility. But then do they always also then indulge in that as well?
Well, I don't have that many great jumpers in our lab. Okay, so one reality when you do like biomechanics research in the lab is you have them come in, they're feeling great, and then you're like, okay, here's some surveys, warm up. We do some like basic testing, and then we're going to attach sensors to your body. And that thing, By the time you're getting ready to jump, you have to warm up again. It's 1 hour in. The lab doesn't have that much light. I try to play music sometimes to get people to like be excited and hyped up. But it's generally your performance is going to be down when you're in the lab.
That's a huge logistical drama. Like it's almost like getting hair and makeup before a movie scene, just like hours and hours of prep. It'd be tough.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, right now, the field itself, like especially for the pro sports teams, they have cameras that can capture your movement in very high def video, and then they run this through software so that they directly get estimates of your body's positions, your posture. And that's like basically when I worked at the Phillies 2 summers ago, that's what they have. So it's actually a lot quicker of a turnaround. It becomes part of the workout. Like pitchers will warm up, throw their pitches outside, and then they come right in, do 20 pitches, they leave. Everything takes 10 minutes. Right now, my study can take up to 2.5 hours just to get everything.
Would the hope
again, it's the reality.
Would the hope be that the work that you're doing with all the force plates and in a much more controlled setting with a lot more measurement instruments can then be used to develop algorithms and machine learning, I guess, to then where you can put it into a camera app and sort of take some of that lab so you can just sort of film people at their training sessions? Or is that like fucking hundreds of years away in terms of technology?
Already exists, actually. Like, it's really a software thing. It's like once you see the video, especially if you time synchronized the video from multiple angles, they can get your 3D's body position in space. Like in our field, we call it motion capture.
Wow.
And to really get the 3D, you need at least 2 cameras. But usually the more the better. I mean, I can't complain that much about logistical things because I'm doing dunking as my PhD. How greedy can you get, really, right?
Yeah, it's pretty sick, though.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, because like I know you're always getting frustrated about the way people describe like problem solving for training these movements and the expression of these movements. What are some of your central frustrations with the way that this is being discussed based on what you're seeing?
Yeah. So first, I'll say there's a lot of good stuff that comes from observations. Like observations from coaches that spend many, many hours. And most of the time, when coaches work with a biomechanist, the coaches will certainly have way more hours in the trenches looking at the movement of interest than a biomechanist would. Right? So then the question is like, what quote unquote unique insight do we actually bring? And it's really our sort of training in terms of physics and mechanics. So I'll sort of explain. And that was sort of one of the first things I learned from both my professor, Dr. Zafferyu, as well as her professor. So Professor Jill McNitt-Gray, who did a lot of work, especially in this field. And her central approach is in figuring out for any movement, what's the mechanical objective. So this is like touching on like the model, the system, the worldview a little bit. So I'll sort of explain this as we go along, okay? And now I'll circle back to...
Right, we're doing it like, because like what I think it is... Actually, I was just going to try to give an answer like what I think the objective is, but then I'm like, so I would have just gone jump high, but I know it's not that simple.
Yeah. For a jump, what do you think the mechanical objective is?
Oh, so I need to use like mechanical words. I want to say impulse. It's something to do with it.
Just in general?
Oh, right. Yeah, you're trying to jump and put the ball in the hoop. So, but obviously that's obvious. I guess I can like put a lot of force into the ground.
Yeah. So
am I going completely off the fucking rails here?
Transform horizontal to vertical?
Yeah.
That's mine.
That seems important.
And it's, well, honestly, what's good with like the people with ground action forces and the Hawking force plays recently, right now there's at least some understanding of, hey, ground action force is going on, right? So that's always a good thing. And that's one of the things that my professor and professor's professor really pushes is like for people to really look at the ground action forces. And so here's why, okay? So for a movement like jumping, for example, certainly the objective, the purest goal is to maximize your jump height. And then because of projectile motion and how gravity works, jump height is essentially your center of mass velocity going up when you are leaving the ground at takeoff, okay? So the objective then is to maximize your center mass velocity at takeoff. And you do that by pushing against the ground. Right? That is, so the layer one, maximizing the velocity. But it's not just velocity you're worried about, because what's the difference between someone at 80 kg and 100 kg? It's their mass. And there's an intricate, there's that relationship between the force you're pushing against the ground, your mass, and your body's acceleration. That's like the Newton's second law. And all that's saying is that to change your body's momentum, you need to apply force into the ground over time. That's the impulse part. So really, if we go back to think about the actual objective of a movement, it's really in the momentum domain, right? Jump high is not just about how fast can you move your center of mass. You do have to overcome gravity. So the objective...
Is this to do with people, I feel like when people are talking about improving jump height and stuff, a lot of people start to talk about things like spending less time on the ground. But again, in my instinct and sort of hearing what you're saying, I'm like, that's sort of like irrelevant. Again, some people will need to spend a lot of time on the ground, some people not so much. But again, it is all just about how much force relative to your momentum and weight.
So this is the thing.
Or do you find that interesting and worth thinking about?
Yeah, no, this is the part where the cueing interacts with the physics side, and whatever you're performing unconsciously might not necessarily be the same as how you are thinking about the movement consciously. Okay.
Because this is something, one of the cues that I've shifted to between, and I've actually been meaning to ask people about is, like, I am just running in trying to dunk. I'm on the low rim. I'm just trying to increase that over time. But yeah, just trying to work out, like, I know I'm relatively quite strong compared to my like elasticity or my speed or whatever. So I was like, should I, because I've been trying to get off the ground quick. I'm like, use that momentum and carry. And I feel like that sort of associates with me trying to get off the ground pretty quickly. But then I'm just like, I'm on two legs. I am quite strong relative to my speed. Maybe I should be like, not deliberately going slow, but like, really just in weightlifting, there's this term of patience, right? It's a speed sport. But like,
this is the interplay. So it's not just about generating force as quickly as you can. It certainly plays a role, but that's not it. So it's about how much force above gravity that you can generate. You don't want to push lightly on the ground for a long time. That's not going to do anything, because you're not beating gravity. It's about how much force over gravity can you literally have, such that that's what gives you the upward acceleration to leave the ground. Okay. So some people, in order to get that much force over gravity, they need to go through a deeper range of motion, take more time. That's what allows them to actually get that magnitude of force. But for others, they need more speed to load their quote-unquote lower limb stretch shortening cycle. But all of that is just to serve the goal of defeating gravity, and that's how you get off the ground. So actually, with your case, Angus, actually, as a meme thing, I have a thing against speed jumpers in general. And
so speed jumpers, I don't actually know what it is. Is that, I imagine, running as fast as possible? That's a big emphasis, and get off the ground quickly. Whereas power jumper is spending more time on the ground. Or what is it?
Yeah, so it's a spectrum, but generally I'm talking about those athletic freaks that can easily bounce off the ground, not much knee angles, and you look at it as like there's no way to ever move like that. But if you look at a power jumper, you're like, hey, maybe if I keep wrapping up these, strength sessions and keep jumping, at least it would be closer, right? And I have a.
Do you know the OG video of Klokov? Have you seen the OG video of Klokov in like 2016, 2018, testing his standing vert, and he almost goes into like an arse to grass squat, but then like he gets well above 30 inches. Yeah. Is that like the apex of a power jumper?
It's like, what's funny is,
as an example,
in biomechanics research, they say, a longer range of center mass. So like the lower you are at the bottom and the higher you are at the top, that's beneficial for jump height. We all know if we all do an ass to grass squat, and then try to jump, it's not going to be that high, right? I think he just maximizes the attribute because he's the best at doing it. And, frankly, my legs would just get too sore. Like when I get to the bottom, I'll be like, I just chill here,
Whereas he just tried to make it a squat, I guess.
No, for sure.
More practically speaking, though, if we look at, your power and elastic people, do you think like leaning into their strengths is better, or is there any value in exposing the other side of the spectrum?
So this one, I don't know as much, but I generally erred on the side of, embracing that this is at least what your most successful strategy is right now. And then there's really no definitive way for someone to say, if we really hone in and have them, play to their strengths, they're really going to get better versus the other side, right? You kind of just have to, in terms of training, biomechanics can never really tell you what's the best way. Happens way more often. It's like, hey, here's another way. And then you're like, great. Now what do we do with this extra information? So generally I refer to as train variously. Variously. Okay. Yeah. And not just your favorite plant. Different legs, different takeoffs, different angles. There you go.
Yeah. And I'm guessing like you leaning into your strengths is probably the way, because you're sort of practicing the skill and you're getting more successful reps at that skill. Is there, like, I know it's probably more of a coach's eye thing, but is there any practical things where you can go, just change up this, change up that, or just comes up over time?
I think the tinkering should almost always happen, whether there's like, direct support from biomechanics or not. And I mean, one thing that happens a lot in research is we take the group findings. We're like, here's the sample of 20, 30 people, and here's what we find, right? And we try to apply those group findings directly to our end-to-one scenario, either for ourselves or for whoever we're working with, right? And one thing I've been trying to really push is in my different studies is like, what are different individuals doing? What are the across participant differences that we're seeing? And
what's our bandwidth of good enough, I guess?
Yeah, no. I mean, what was the question with the thing?
I think I
was sort of looking at like
I know you go. Because I need to know.
I was sort of, I'm like, are we really just trying to observe currently like the totality of the bandwidth of techniques that will produce pretty good jumping, like dunkable sort of jumps?
Oh yeah, no, that there's, like, if you really parse it out, the good jumpers, the bad jumpers, the good jumpers, it's not too exciting. It looks generally what you expect. Ability to produce high force.
One of the things that you said earlier is that there was a lot more variability in 2-foot jumping. And instinctively, that makes a lot of sense to me, because all of a sudden you've got so many different configurations of your plant. But what are the constraints of that? Like, what are the things when one of these variables starts to increase or decrease too much? We're like, this isn't going to help.
Yeah, no. So how I approach that is like, to maximize jump height, you always have to, especially from a running approach, you always have to generate backward and upward forces. If one leg is not able to do that job as well, the other leg almost has to take over in a sense, right? And then there's a shift in the movement strategies that can sometimes be a good thing, sometimes not. And then what you can see that happen a lot is like when you perform the opposite plant that you usually do. So if you are really, really good at right, left, for example, and then you have to flip, then whether your legs can handle like the other roll. And for me, that was one of my dead research ideas, because my realization is people just can't jump off the other side at all, right? They can't do it. It's not well practiced enough for me to get enough data. But for me,
because dunk balance was something that came up. That does get brought up. And it's almost like make sure you're working out the front muscles as much as you work out the back muscles. And again, like it seems like a bit of a common sense thing to it, but then we know when you actually observe a lot of these things that are apparently common sense, doesn't end up being that sort of true. And I'm sort of 50-50 with it as well, even just coming from my own sort of perspective on that. But then, and hearing you say how people are so exposed when they're forced to switch up their plant and their block, what I'm really curious about is what are the patterns you notice in those limbs? And then is that a reason to explore more single leg jumping or switching up your setup to bring up some of the deficiencies in those sides? Because, and it's funny, we were trying to get away from this. I'm coming back to this injury prevention conversation because I'm really curious, are you noticing a pattern in injuries in the plant or the block leg or symptoms and things like that?
That's such an interesting discussion. I actually do want to give a shout out to Ben Patrick, a bit of a controversial figure. But actually, I've been saying this to many people. I think one of the best things he's done is jump balance. Like,
so you'd like it?
I love it, actually. I practice it a lot, and it's like Mimi way saying
jump variously.
Just jump variously, right? You know. And then shout out the shirt. I actually got it for free, but I have to pay like £20. It was in the UK back then. I have to pay £20 from the border to actually get the shirt for me. But we actually to actually understand injuries in a particular movement, you can't hurt people in the lab. You know, the ethics board is gonna freak out. So the next best thing a lot of people have tried to use is quantifying the loads on the joints during specific movements. And, we call it joint kinetics. Kinetics meaning force. We want to know the forces and the torques that the joints experience/generate to accomplish the task. So I actually already have the data. I'm just trying to write it up to submit for a paper, but I quantified the joint loads in a 2-foot running jump. And it's as expected. You see very different joint loads and actions across the limbs, right? Each leg has a very distinct role. The plant leg is in contact with the ground quite a while longer than the block leg. And that's sort of one thing where during the initial contact of the plant leg, that's what catches the body's downward momentum. And what we found in my first jumping paper was that the plant leg is actually solely responsible for stopping your body's downward velocity. So think about the catch. That's all done by your plant leg. So you're already at the bottom.
Putting this in my own words, there's almost like no eccentric forces on the block leg, just the plant leg.
Or less. Or especially there's more force, but less eccentric movement.
Okay.
Compared to the yielding and the extending of the plant and the block leg has a lot less. And we already know that, right?
Yeah.
But what's pretty cool is we are pretty much already at the lowest point near the time where the block leg contacts the ground. So one of the direct coincidence of that is the hip torque that's experienced by the plant leg is way higher. It's one of the highest torques experienced by any of the lower limb joints if you just do your joint moment computations. And that's very, very consistent, especially if you are like a very skilled jumper who has the signature, the leg split in the air, one leg contacts far in front of you, and when you have your leg in front of you and then you're in free fall, right? You're not contacting the ground, you're free fall, that's going to spike the hip extensor load. And that was like my finding a couple years back, 2 years back. And then one day I hear Isaiah Rivera talk about it on their podcast, and they're like, it's always the glute of the plant leg that's sore. And I was like, ding ding, it's the same. And that's what explains it, because you're in eccentric action, it's high load, your muscles are actually stretched since your leg is in front of you, right? It's consistent.
Muscle damage.
And that's one of the unexpected things. Everybody thinks it's like the knees, right? And yes, your knees are certainly going through a lot in jumping. But if you only view it from the lens of the torque is experienced by the joints, we saw that hips, first leg or plant leg hip extensors have one of the highest, followed by the knees. So
Because I think this has very meaningful implications for load management, especially in your weight room in your S&C, because this is a variable that I'm always having to titrate with. Again, approach jumping now in my programming. I like doing my fucking cartwheels. I experience the same thing, like so much force is going through that landing foot on the hip side as well. And like, because what I've found is I've had to be quite precise and quite, not hesitant is not the right word, but pretty scarce with my hip hinge loading. Because again, like I'm doing ollie lifts, I'm doing squatting, I'm doing the hinging in the ollie lift, and I want to get in some RDLs or some form of just like isolated hip extension training. But again, always having, and again, we stereotype a lot of these jumping and these plyometrics things as being so much more impactful on the more distal extremity. But it's like, no, it's like, you still have to acknowledge all those really intense forces going through the hip. So this is personally validating to hear, I guess, in terms of like how I'm thinking about my problem solving.
Yeah. And a lot of that, it really comes down to the posture you have when you interact with the ground, right? And that's a bit of a redundant statement, because literally the computations to get to those joint torques and moments, it's based on the force you have when you interact with the ground and your body's posture. Those are like the inputs that goes into the computations to get the loads you have on the joints. And then I don't want to go too nerdy on this, but you can also like go a step deeper. So beyond looking at just the loads, if you also compute the angular velocity or the directions that the segments are rotating, you can figure out if it's a load generated in the eccentric or the concentric. And that's usually described as joint power. So when it's an eccentric action, you're absorbing power, you're absorbing work, you're absorbing energy, and you're trying to generate torque to fight against it. So it's like the yielding in a way. And you can compute it, you can see it all. And what we know about hypertrophy training, eccentric stresses making you sore, you see that very easily when you do that analysis.
Yeah. It was sort of interesting hearing you say absorbing, because that's definitely one of the words. Is it Dan Cleaver?
Yes.
Is it okay to say absorbing, or is that dumb? Were you using that for us normies who don't understand physics? What are your thoughts on that?
It's fine for energy / work.
Is it like toning, where everyone knows what you mean, even though it's a little bit inaccurate?
Energy absorption is very legit. It's when you in a non-perfect, not like perfectly elastic collision. When you drop a sack of clothes onto the ground, right? Kinetic energy gets absorbed into the.
And you're not jumping back; right. You just stay down. Right. Yeah.
So there's energy absorption, but for force, there's really That's why maybe we shouldn't really always say push, right? Or it's really force application. For force, there's always application, and that's just because of how Newton's third law describes force as the entity. So yes, every time you interact with the external environment, there's application of the force from you to the environment, which is the same as the one environment applies back to you. You don't have to necessarily think about actively pushing to apply force, right? You can drop down, like you can start stationary, drop down to the bottom of the squat. You're not pushing, right? You're just free falling, but there is still application of force from your feet to the ground and vice versa. So for force.
Now I understand, because I was like, what the fuck do you mean putting forces is not always pushing? Now I understand, like that intention.
Yeah. Again, that's why Newton's laws are so counterintuitive.
From what I'm trying to do, it's happening. Like
you don't need to think about it. Our body think about yeah. And I mean that is the case when we are trying to explain, we're trying to communicate, the mechanics, physics to not only just like coaches, it's even other researchers. Like people come into sports biomechanics from many different backgrounds. Some of them don't include like the mechanics and physics education that the others might have. Like if you come from engineering or literal physics degrees background, then, obviously you have a deeper grasp on mechanics, Newtonian mechanics.
If you want access to a community of like-minded coaches, head to the notes below and join our free school community. I'm in there every week doing Q&As, and there's plenty of educational content on the way as well.
Something that I chronically overthink when jumping and dunking is my arms, because I know through like all of this content that I've been consuming over the past couple of years, I know how much the distal structures change how the proximal structures move. With dunking and your findings, have you found anything that is worth looking at in regards to that?
Yeah, I was just dealing with that like this week, when that's for my like Bono, I call it the Bono ball comparisons, like jumping with a ball versus jumping without a ball, and dribble dunks versus just jumps. And one of the things is like in the literature, this is kind of like getting to the hot take zone, minute 45, why I hate stationary jumps.
Get the clip ready, get the clip along.
There's a lot of research on counter movement jumps, whether you have arm swing or not. And it's like a very, very popular topic, right? And it has direct applications when you're testing for quote unquote readiness or, power, right? And people do comparisons. They're like, what is the contribution of the arms to performance? And my next question is like, what do you mean by contribution? Are you talking about the easiest way is say jump with arms, jump without arms? What's the difference in jump heights? You can argue, that 15-20% difference is the contribution. But is it really due to the arm, or is it because of how the arms modify the legs? So people, yes.
Just quickly as well, does this overlap a lot with the Lance Brooks stuff about how people were thinking about the arms as being this propulsive element, and then when we took them away, we're like, it's really just this form of dynamic stabilization? Because coaches would always get up me about my arms swinging across my body, and they're like, you're trying to go fucking forwards, swing them forwards, cunt. But obviously my body was just trying to stop me falling over because I'm a shit sprinter. And is it sort of the same? It's like, it's just this thing. It's just an artifact.
Yeah, no, it's similar because, okay, so this is why momentum is the lens you should be looking at, because it's not just about how fast something is moving. Momentum includes both a body part's mass and velocity. If we're talking about linear momentum. For angular, it's also similar. But the faster something can move, it's because it's lighter. Okay, it doesn't mean it's contributing more to the motion of the whole body, and it doesn't mean they necessarily have like the most amount of momentum. The reasons your arms can afford to swing quite fast, especially in the case of running, is because they have lower mass. And similarly, the reason you can have super, super high rotational velocity in the throwing a baseball pitch, especially about like the internal IR, direction and the pronation, supination direction, is because the amount of resistance against rotation is the least in that direction. So it's like some body parts can only move so fast.
Whereas a fucking thigh, like all that meat,
you can't move it that fast, right? They have too much momentum to really be swinging around. That's why the thighs, guess what? They're going forward and backward. That is the goal. But for the arms, it's fast, and especially from an angular momentum rotation perspective, yes, in sprinting, it's doing more of the rotation side than linear propulsion. But it doesn't mean it does not modify how your lower limb is working. So there's always like the body segment's direct contribution to the movement of the body itself by itself versus how it modifies the rest of the body moves. And that's really what's happening in jumping. Like people have quantified the literal amount of momentum generated by the arms, and then they will plot it and they say, here's the curves for the trunk, the thigh, the leg, and here's the arms, and you can barely see it. It's like so close to zero because it's so light. When you account for a segment's mass as well as its speed, when you multiply them in terms of momentum computations, it's really not that much. So people sort of pivoted away from just looking at the arms and how it modifies the rest of the body. Okay, so it's really about how. Yes.
Because then I was trying to figure out the best path for me to dunking because I have no handles, and I either have to learn to self lob or something like that, or run in with the ball. I was told that if I was going to run in with the ball, I'd essentially need to be like this 11-foot jumper. That is not my experience. My experience, I feel like I can just swing that fucking ball as I'm running in, and it's just like this big one arm that I've got. What are your thoughts on that? Or would you need to see it in the lab? You're like, fuck, I don't know.
No, this one, there's a lot of discussions with like, okay. So what I found, everybody when they do a dribble dunk, so when they have the ball in the run up, and then they go up, 18 out of 21 people jump lower. So it's like majority of people jump lower.
Okay.
It's so intuitive. I don't even want to put it as a finding, but because there are so little things out there, it's a finding. It's a finding in a study.
It's worth writing down.
It is what it is. So if you want to dunk by yourself, I think I used to be a lob hater, but it's whether it's easier for you to get better at jumping higher versus it's easier for you to learn the lob.
I think I'm just a fucking uncoordinated and I just need to work on jumping 12 feet. I think I could fucking probably dunk on like much. Yeah, I'll never figure out how to lob. I'm useless, man. Like, whereas like the one thing I have is.
But like, for Jacob, even just practice lobbing by just, especially if you're worried about load management, just practice lobbing. That's like the easiest way. You don't have to worry about your hips and knees going out, and inadvertently, you actually end up practicing a lot of lobs when you throw enough shit ones, and then you can judge it, right? I know too well. When I was back in my undergrad, I was just trying to do off the dribble dunks because I was just so sick of throwing lobs. It's the same as
me too. That was me. Yeah.
When I front squat, my traps hurt when I back squat. Eventually, they don't hurt. Eventually, you start throwing more decent lobs.
Yeah.
It does pump the ball up though. If you want to do lobs, if you want to do it,
okay, because I've been going a little bit deflated, so I can just
so you can grab.
That makes sense for the lobs to get that bounce.
If you want to go off the dribble, have a softer ball. It's easier to actually get it down without dribbling. But I think off the lob easier. Obviously, perfectly, you have the hoop and the ball just in front or above it, or even as it's going in. That's like the most ideal scenario. So you bounce as if you're trying to do like a horse shot, and then you just have a bounce right in after ground contact. That would be perfect, and you just give it a nice little and you're dunking.
Yeah.
And you can change your name to Angus.dunks.
Nothing. I'm fine with public humiliation. Like, I learned how to use starting blocks in my first ever track meet. So my threshold for just going out and just being shit in public is pretty high. Nothing makes me feel like more of a loser than practicing lobs. And people are walking past and they see you do this like weird underhanded shot and then this kind of hesitant run up and you're trying to sort of see where the ball's going to go. And they're like, oh, are you trying to work on your shooting? I'm like, no, I'm trying to dunk. And they're like, oh, you're basketball. I'm like, no, I just chronically online, like watching other people dunk and like fucking 32-year-old in my drive. I love it. Like I said, I love it. But yeah, just doing the lobs makes me feel a bit rare. But yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to embrace the lob journey. I'm hearing from two experienced dunkers who've completed the journey. It's like, I'm going to be doing some reps anyway. I'm going to have time to learn how to lob.
Yeah. I tried it once, bounced it too high, hit a car, and then never since. It went over the backboard and hit a car. So I never tried ever since.
Quickly, before we go back into physics and research chat, how much rest are you guys having between attempts to keep things productive? Like, I know with more powerful things, meant to have like, a little bit more rest. But then there's another part of me that just wants to get practice reps in. Like, what are your thoughts about lowering the rest? I'm not saying like working up a sweat and getting out of breath, but or do you think the intensity, because it's so specific, is of highest importance? And rest up.
So, okay, you told me yourself relative to your peak power output, you are not jumping that high, right?
Yeah.
So then that on the flip side, it also means when you're jumping, you're not using close to your maximum amount of output that you can achieve. So you just go. You can't be that tired, right?
Yeah, because it doesn't seem to fluctuate too much.
Right, and you're at it sort of happens when
when I get good, maybe I'll notice I only rest 30 seconds.
Your body's trying to coordinate the positions of your legs relative to your center, and the different joint angles and timings. So all of that motor learning is happening, and you're not really limited by fatigue like some of the higher levels people might be. So just go when you feel ready, and that's generally my approach. Like even I'm not that athletic at all, which is why I'm in research. I'm not even strong enough to be a strength coach.
Same.
I'll just in my dunk sessions, I would just do like an attempt from one side. I'll move over and I'll do the other sequence, and I'll just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And because of how different each leg works, like it's not necessarily completely overlapping. So, if my right knee is feeling a little sore, but guess what? In my left-right jumping, my right knee is not going to bend as much, right? It's not going to go as deep. And the ground contact time is going to be smaller. The eccentric load is going to be smaller. I could afford to get more reps in on the other sequence. And since I don't really care about like absolute jump height, I just want to, be able to do whatever finish I want in the game, then you can keep going. Yeah. You shouldn't be limited by the fatigue, local fatigue at least.
One other thing I have, and I'm curious to see what you've observed. I think you already sort of touched on it. I am trying to get low in my approach, but I'm starting to think that this might be like getting low in acceleration in sprinting, where it's like, relative to the upright phase, I have to be low, but then there's certain physical qualities that dictate how low you can get productively. Because this is the thing, I feel like I could run in way harder for my jump, but I wouldn't be able to handle the momentum and convert it into vertical forces. Like, I feel like that's a big discrepancy. So do you think I should be like cueing myself to try to get as low as possible? Or is it something that you sort of let emerge from just trying to jump with momentum?
Yeah, no, it's hard. Like sometimes, I don't know if other people feel it, but for me, when I get quite deep into the dunk session, even just running squatted, it's hard. It's hard on your quad, and it's theoretically it should be beneficial having low. But then if you let that really, if you focus too much on that, I don't think it's going to be as conducive to jump high.
Okay, wait, just quickly though. So, because what you just described, that squatted run into it, I'm sort of doing just like lowering in that last 1 to 2 steps, maybe was sort of how. But you're thinking like it's like stay low, get high, just one L sort of in terms of intention.
So it's just it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. The goal is to make sure as you go in, you are like low enough for what you can currently do, but also you don't have too much velocity going down. Like people in the technique world, we call it
you got to overcome it.
Exactly, you got to overcome it more, and it's really about like how well you can. You don't have to necessarily minimize every single ounce of downward velocity because it's not feasible. You're free falling. There's always going to be a little bit, right? But once you find the right balance, it's about like how can you go from having your plant leg in front of you and then being able to generate upward force from there. And I can give you all the findings, but at the end of the day, it's just specific practice variously. And then, and then it's time. It really is time. I probably have how Instagram, they're like, oh, here's my 3 months dunk transformation. And I was like, I've been wanting to dunk for 10 years. And I only got to year 8.
Wait, how tall are you?
I'm 5'9".
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well,
I don't have the best gene. I probably didn't crawl enough as a kid because my mom was afraid of like dirty floors. I would trip when I was small. I would trip on the floor and then I'd break my teeth. I was genuinely uncoordinated. It's pretty horrendous. Which is why I'm researching. Yeah.
Not enough sagittal competency.
Let's get Angus's dunk clips up. Give me 1 second. Time to.
Actually, you want to touch on what is optimal technique? Because I have another special.
Contrast it with this. Here we go.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing the movement. I'm seeing the movement. Okay, there's one recommendation actually I could give. Angus, let me ask you this question. I'll do the classic podcast get. I'll ask you this question, Angus. Were you scared that you're gonna run into the base of the hoop?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's gonna affect how you jump, right?
Yeah.
So one thing, shout out to the PPA guys, Coach Chase, Coach Tyler. They gave me the suggestion for my study as well. When I love dunking on that thing in my lab for fun. But when you jump straight on, there's always the fear, and you certainly don't want to say, "Oh, please only jump in a diagonal fashion." That's gonna completely mess up your data and usable. So here's the thing that he has me do, and I have to explain to the participants. So just turn the basket to 90 degrees, so you're jumping from behind the baseline.
Oh, okay? Yes, I have the same issue. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right on. It's not my idea. It's Chase and Tyler's smart idea. And think about it. It's the exact same angle you will run in as a vertex. Exactly the same. You're running in from behind. If you're doing a right-left jump, you're curving slightly to the right. Try it next time. Thank me later. You should jump without the inhibitions of, oh, am I going to be a Paul George on landing? You know,
that's exactly. I was literally about to say that.
On the way in?
I was about to say that.
Wait. I feel like I missed something important. I'm running straight. So you sort of meant to not a high jump curve, or is it almost a high jump curve?
That's what I do. Yeah.
There's some curve, but the curve really comes. So in high jump, it's quite controversial actually. Even though we're all like, everybody does a curve. What do you mean? Dick Fosbury did a curve, and there's a bit of debate. There's really two sort of benefits that people have tried to argue. One is that when you lean your body into the curve, you can maintain balance while lowering your center of mass. So your body is lower to the ground. Remember, we would say, the more range you have to accelerate upward, the better. The curve allows you to have a lean without squatting, without doing a squatted run. So Lance Brooks will be happy. The other thing for curve is that it sets your body center of mass away from the bar. So therefore, when you have rotation in the air, it gives you more room to rotate. In dunking,
to get back.
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
Exactly. In dunking, I don't really know what the function is, to be honest. It's one of the things I wanted to investigate, but then our lab space is not big enough. But there are some things I'll throw out as future ideas in case there's more people that wants to study 2-foot jumps in the future. So number one, my idea is that when you curve, and then you usually curve to the inside. So your plant leg is the inside leg, your block leg is the outside leg. As you curve, and then you go into your final contact, you might have more rotation of the body around your plant leg. So maybe the curve helps your block leg hit harder against the ground. Maybe. I don't know. Another possible thing is when you curve, your center mass is a bit lowered, but I don't know how much that is the case in 2-foot running jumps. I don't know how much lean and at least not in my data. But again, it's a possible mechanism. But I think what's probably most likely is if you play enough basketball, when you have to attack the basket, you have a defender in the way, you almost always just curve around the defender. I think that's also when you don't play basketball, you run straight to the basket, right? I think it might also be a habitual thing. Again,
because I'm the non-hooper. You guys are hoopers, and I was the one who was just straight up just beelining it to the hoop. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
And I think it's fine. It's totally fine to start like that. And, some people will say you need to try to achieve a rotation as you contact the ground. So your block leg swings to the front to contact the ground.
So deliver that leg. Yeah. Okay.
But so some really, really elite athletes, they actually kick the ground. If I do it, I'll get tendonitis the next day. But you will see Mikey Williams, one of his older videos, he literally it's as if he's kicking a soccer ball, football. He's kicking the ground with the block so hard you can see the knee bend backwards into flexion, and then it extends as it contacts the ground.
Wow.
it's just a way to really generate a lot of force for the block leg. So
if you have the tendons for it, you can do some violent shit and just be fine. And sorry, not just be fine, but like benefit from it. Hey, it's just about like
utilize
so many people cannot use the momentum. It just seems to me like it's like if you in any way you can find a way to maximally harness momentum, you'll just be this freak. Again, I'm sort of pretending like it's just this. It's such a hard problem to solve.
Yeah,
I'm feeling just these layers of inhibition wash off my system over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And when I look at myself compared to other people, I'm like, fuck. There's so long to go. It's like,
yeah, no,
but you're so right, Sam, with the Paul George analogy. Literally, that is what played in my head over and over.
Yeah. So just turn that bad boy to the side, thinking your Russell Westbrook driving from the baseline.
Yeah,
doing your defender, and then you just keep gliding. Right? Yeah. You just glide, you land smoothly, no worries about landing or anything. What's hard is if you throw a lob, it might be hard to find where the basket is. So in that case, maybe. Yeah, that's the only downside with the.
I'll go hit some 9-footers side on for you today, boys.
We value your input here at the High Performance Podcast. Head to the SpeakPipe link in the notes below and you can leave us a voicemail where you can ask us a question or leave us a topic for us to explore on the show. We hope to hear from you soon.
One more thing, Sam. I know we talked about the arm swing and stuff like that. I found personally that going from like left pocket and then as I'm down, coming up like that into extension as high as I can helped a lot. Is that anything to do with the arms or anything like that, or the way I'm generating force, sort of thing?
It could be. I think so. Let's go back to the objective discussion. Usually that helps frame why people are doing certain things. Because when you define the objective in a particular movement, all of the techniques, the preferences, the movements contextualize around the objective. So what is the goal when you try to jump as high as you can with a basketball? You want to obviously do the same things as before with maximizing jump height, but even more important is you don't lose the ball on the way up, right? So what could be happening is that it's just a nice way to allow you to make sure the arms are going upwards, but without you losing the ball. That's why you can see some people, if they're especially more skilled, they can do like the PJF call it the one-handed Iverson pickup, where they will pound ball with one hand and then just freely swing the other one. Or some people, they do like a cuff with the ball resting in between the hand and the wrist of one hand. They cuff it like this, and then they swing both arms up. Okay. So,
I can't imagine.
It's such a clear way of thinking, though, just to step back and be like, whenever you're trying to understand what is the contribution, it's like you have to think about what it's trying to do. And there's no way around that. As soon as you're trying to work out what the arms are trying to do when they have a ball versus when they don't, you're answering a slightly different question.
Correct. Yeah. And when the objectives are modified across different tasks/conditions, very likely your techniques will also change, right? Your techniques / your movement strategies will change because the objective change. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but you have to be prepared for the opportunity.
Open to.
Right? You have to be prepared for the possibility. Yeah.
Just before we launch into a bit of a physics glossary of terms for chronically online trainers, I want to get you to mediate for the High Performance Podcast a chat between Darian Barr and Lance Brooks.
You know what's funny? It's like Lance Brooks, I think, posted something about squatted running, and then I shared it on my story, and then I was blocked by Darian Barr.
Dude, I got blocked by Darian on his old page. I think he always forgets his Instagram login, so I'm not blocked on the new shit. So don't worry.
I was like, what? and it's like, I went to his London seminar as well. Like, actually, I was a participant in one of his juice one leg demo.
So I think I got blocked because my brother sounds like me, and my brother was making jokes about him. I feel like I've only ever gassed him up online. And so it was either the fact that my brother sounds exactly like me and he's heard him say something funny, or I was sort of going maybe he's blocking me because I feel like Adarian Barr really values free thinking. He's like, these guys agree with me too much. I'll block them so they can learn to think for themselves. Maybe that was too charitable.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just trying to make sense of it. I was like, Adarian, like, you don't even follow me. All I do is like come on and like your post every now and then. I'm like, what's going on here, man?
Yeah.
Because he's sort of, he gets up to some stuff. Like, I think he had this big obsession with like finding the center, which is like the taint or something like that, and like coaching the taint. But I mean, I feel like he's come up with so many like genuinely useful concepts. Like there's so much gold in it. It's almost like the WEX stuff. I think when someone's a little bit silly in certain areas, people want to sort of paint that quality over everything that they say. But I'm like, yeah, I just genuinely, there's some fucking gold in there. But then I see Lance's perspective with the squatted running. It's just like, it's just such people speaking past each other. Because I know Adarian Barr, when he says squatted posture, he's like, people aren't running tall because I'm seeing bend in the limb. Like there is bend in the limb. So like to me, that's squatted because again, like a quarter squat, we still call it a fucking squat.
Well,
I get what he means.
You want a quarter squat?
But yeah. And then I feel like Lance is looking at it and be like, no, we're not asked to grass squatting our way down the track, and better sprinters maybe have less hip knee angle. I don't fucking know.
I see it like a sensory thing. It's like it's running variously. What's the difference here? It's just sprinting variously, right?
You know what it helped me with? It helped me feel hip extension for the first time in running.
Right? Yeah.
Genuinely, like the first, and I was like, I understood the role, how frequency helps, and because people are, but you'll never run as fast squatted. I'm like, yeah,
so that's
get less squatted, and then exactly, it's a drill.
Yeah, you don't run fast having your squat 1 RM on your back.
Yeah,
that's not the point. Yeah, that's why whenever there's like funny looking drills that might not be biomechanically as sound, you can almost view it as a like learning through error, right? In terms of putting you in like really awkward positions to try to create some sort of a behavior, if not change, just a experience, right? You feel
this is the gymnastics technique. Gymnasts for fucking centuries, they explore the error on either side,
correct,
to find the perfect spot. And I just think it's because we have this conversation in sprinting, in fucking Olympic lifting, where people are like, oh, the errors are always on this side. I'm like, no, it's fucking errors on both sides. Like, no, there's typically like a pattern, like one's a little bit more common, but it's like, yeah, pisses me off.
Yeah, no, it's like when you apply. So this is a bit above my pay grade in terms of like what I know, but like when you sort of apply like, constraint-based learning, right? You provide a setting for people to experience a variety of scenarios, make a bunch of different mistakes, and you learn from it, versus saying this is the right way, and just only do that. Right?
Outside as a straw man, it'd be like none of these drills have any dynamic correspondence. I'm like, right. I'm looking for the fuck.
Yeah, so that's why usually I try to keep my best to keep an open mind with these things, especially if they are communicated as it's a way to experience body parts in the movement. For example, if they say for example, this is like physically the most correct way, and it's not, then I'll make a spicy post. But usually I keep a generally very open mind.
Everyone loves your content. Well, like you don't have a big page, but when you look at the people who know, like, and follow your content quite closely, it's like you're a very valued member of the online community.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody.
You got to make more content. Oh, sorry, we're not done as well. If you're not running away from us, I want to sort of talk about just quickly help us with our glossary of physics terms, or like what are the most commonly bastardized physics concepts that are being discussed online and being used by S&C coaches?
Yeah, so this sort of goes back to like the worldview, the model. So I sort of talked a bit about the objective of the movement. In a lot of sporting movements, the objective ends up being in the momentum domain. So here's what I mean, okay? In jumping, you want to maximize upward velocity, but because you have to fight against your own weight, it's really a matter of maximizing your upward momentum. That is the goal. and you're maximizing your own body's upward momentum. But you flip it over to something like throwing or even Olympic weightlifting, you are trying to change the momentum of an external implement, okay? In throwing a baseball, you want to maximize the momentum of the ball. Obviously, ball has velocity that is like what people measure, but ball also has a fixed mass. And that mass is what you have to work with. So also like Thomas, he's like Vitamin Form on Instagram. He said way back how momentum can be a better performance measure or like KPI than, even power. And that's because of the very fact that momentum measures or momentum variables, they literally are the performance measure. Your upper momentum literally is your jump height.
But people measure power in so many arbitrary ways. Are you speaking to a specific measure of power? Like, just why I don't really fuck with the power thing too much.
Yeah. So what they mean is like, peak, even in sprinting, like peak power, concentric, eccentric, all of that. And those are correlates of performance, but momentum is performance, right? That's why it's in terms of role review.
Like Goodhart's law versus like the thing that fucking matters.
That literally the thing is momentum. Like, for example, a squat, right? You want to make sure you, on the downward, whether you're fighting against or whatnot, but you want to make sure from the bottom to the top, there's upward momentum of the barbell. Okay, that is the objective. Upward momentum of the barbell, and then your body does whatever it takes to satisfy that objective, to generate that momentum. So in our lab's research, and my grand professor's research, we call it mechanical objective of a movement. From a momentum perspective, what must happen in order for the movement to actually be completed? I'll just give one more example in like a gymnastics move, like a cartwheel, right? The objective is to make sure your body has enough rotational momentum to complete a loop and enough like regulated momentum to make sure you stay on balance. So these are like, when you view things through momentum, you know what your goal is. So that's level one. It's the momentum, the objective. That is the level one.
So the momentum part, is that the body weight part, like your own mass?
That's linear momentum, yes. Angular, it's a little more annoying in terms of, but you should think about it as it's not just how fast something moves, it's also how much stuff you're moving, how much mass you're moving, and what kind of shape is that mass? Because a water bottle rotates very differently than a brick. That's why people say, "Oh, I don't want to get into the wide and narrow rotating." I don't think it's that different. In my opinion, also they
can both fucking rotate. I've worked with so many wide ISA rotational fucking athletes because a human is more complex than their infrasternal angle. It is but one of a billion fucking factors of performance. You fucking aesthetic narratives. You're like, I'm a wide ISA. Oh, I'm doomed to fucking powerlifting. Kelly Slater's the best surfer of all fucking time. Surfing to me is about fucking rotational as it gets. Shout out to Wade Carmichael. Shout out to Mark Occhilupo. Shout out to Sonny Garcia. Shout out to every other fucking wide ISA rotates like a Beyblade and can throw over 90 miles an hour. It's fucking, sorry.
Right, like, fine. I mean, I think maybe wide ISA is better for being a batter. You know how humongous those guys are? Like, they
I think it's like either can be good at either. There's just like stereotypes about like, one is typically the one that you see in the textbook.
Yeah.
Dictating a lot of the thoughts on the technical model more so than the other one. And that it does provide a framework for understanding where people might productively diverge from a textbook technical model for a sport that is centered around people who typically look a certain way.
Correct. Yeah. So, I don't have too much take on that. But basically,
sorry, I've just been grouped in with like 6 other fucking coaches who I hate the way that they train lately. So it's like, I'm not going to be like, look, I like this whole compression expansion. I like the wide and narrow archetypes, but like, I also hate the way 90% of people fucking apply that framework rigidly.
One reality is like, we like to say this particular movement is very simple. Here's the exact easy way. And reality is like, it's just so much more complicated. And I think perhaps it's good for people to acknowledge the fact that things can be complicated, right? On the physics.
But this is worldview, and I hope it lines up with you, sorry, but that like I acknowledge complexity in everything as part of my worldview. And that's why it's even more important to keep your actual interventions simple.
Well,
because like ultimately that's the benefit of the simplistic understanding, right?
Here's the kicker, okay? The objective, the mechanical objective for any movement, it's almost always simple. It's either you want to maximize, it's both linear and rotational momentum. They both apply. So it's either maximizing for sprinting, forward momentum. That's it. For jumping, maximizing upward momentum. And that's it. And then there's also implicit things like you want to make sure your rotational momentum keeps you in balance, right? That's the thing with the arm swing where about the vertical axes, they somewhat cancel out. And about the forward axes, some people say you are always falling from one step to the other, right? So there's some sort of angular momentum that keeps you going forward.
Falling is very controversial as well.
It's how it's defined, right? It's how it's defined. You know, in the clinical world, even it's clinical biomechanics research. Like for just how you fall, it's so controversial. It's not even well defined yet.
Does it sort of relate though to what you were saying about the difference between putting force into the ground and pushing?
It potentially, yeah. You could be actively trying to create a fall, like some baseball pitchers end up doing. They might not think about creating a fall, but when they say stay on your back leg before your front leg contacts the ground, that is you're trying to create a fall, and that's what generates so much rotational momentum. And so, but basically, for your objective or any movement, you have linear and rotational momentum is associated with it. But it's like either you maximize one momentum and you regulate the other, or you want to maximize a few, or you want to regulate both. That's actually the simple part. The objective, it's almost quite simple when you actually, when you have a grasp of like momentum and motion and movement. The objective itself is usually simple. What's complex is how
the factors that contribute to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, is always complex.
What's so complex is like the how those objectives are satisfied. Part each whole limb.
But there's simplicity in that, in being that like, I mean, a lot of people instinctively figure it out with practice. It's like then where you go back to like simple implementation. It's like, oh, do you want to use your arms to contribute? Do you want to use swing your legs around more? Do you want to wave your torso around more like a fucking ostrich?
Yeah, and this
shout out to
like one extra thing is like when you start looking at the objectives and how people are satisfying it, then you'll realize, wow, the solution space really is large. And that's just simply looking at like very, very high level, like the whole leg summing to do this one thing, the whole leg summing to generate forces in these directions. And that we're not even touching on whether the hips are contributing more than the knees and this leg during this part of the movement versus that, right? So that the complexities really start to branch out the more you go from the objective and how the objectives are being satisfied. So that's why when people think about, why are people's knees going in or out in the squat, for example, maybe if we somehow have abilities like to see the forces, we'll realize potentially they are just trying to align their limbs with the ground reaction forces. So it's going straight through, right? And then it's really about like thinking, to change momentum, we need force against the ground. We generate that force in many ways. And our limbs, especially our lower limb joints, can coordinate to generate those forces in many different ways. And to be able to say, we acknowledge the fact that there's many solutions. Some from experience we know can be more advantageous for some people. This is when you typically see, this technique or this kinds of athletes, right? They are better suited for this strategy, even though, whether you are, a elastic or power, the goal is to still generate force to beat gravity. The objective is the same. The strategy to do so is different. And that's why I said, as biomechanists, we can start with a very simple examination of here's the strategy. We wonder how athletes are doing it. And then instead of finding the best way, we just found a new way. And we can say, next time coaches, when you see something that seems unfamiliar, you could be looking at Usain Bolt, or you could just be looking at Jimmy, who's going to work as an accountant. You don't know. But
so is that your goal as research, is to find the different road to get to the clear objective goal that you're trying to achieve in the movement? Is that what you're saying?
Usually we don't even have enough to say that, but what we can say is for this strategy, here's what's happening in it. Here's what the requirements are on the joint, knees, the hips, and the ankles, right? If you want to go for this strategy, these are your considerations.
Yeah.
Right? And generally you can say, especially since we are not working with infinite data set, within our group of 20 people, which is already quite a lot of data. I like to say so much data since this project started from nothing before I was here. I literally, it was like 0 to 100%, like way back to nothing until now. So 20 people is quite a lot of people for this project. And I can say, 15 out of the 20 people use this strategy and they perform average to good. So there's a likelihood that, this is pretty decent, right? And here's the loading on the body that you might experience with this strategy. Here's, the general characteristics of the people that use the strategy. And sadly, it doesn't get any more exciting than that, really. We think the finding strategy itself is the exciting part, right? One thing I sort of went away from my start of my PhD to now is like saying, oh, what is the best technique? My answer is the best technique is the one that allows to jump highest right now. And then you're going to have a new best technique.
I reckon that concludes the classy bit of the show. Let's get into a call out. How much do you talk to Sisa training?
Oh, I chat to him quite a bit, actually, yeah.
I want to bully him into doing 100 meters because I think he's very slow. And my issue isn't that he's slow. His issue is that he's called me out for apparently fudging my max velocity numbers. I just want to say on record, I don't believe that he was as slow as he's claiming to be, because that is so fucking slow for an adult male. And again, it's not like I've just sort of, I ran so much faster than 8.5 meters a second or wherever he was coming through without training. I mean, I was smashing just pure fucking Olympic weightlifting and I got to 9 meters a second. I'm like, what is so fucking and because he keeps saying that 9.4 meters a second is elite athlete speed. It's like, I'm fucking telling you it's not, because I was the slowest cunt on my fucking football team and my soccer team growing up. And I know that whatever I fucking do in my life, that is not an elite sprint performance. Whatever the fuck I touch by definition is truly sub-elite. So my contention is he needs to stop fucking labeling anything that's a hair above 9 meters a second to be elite speed. Fuck that. It can't go above 11 meters a second. I also want that prick to put himself in 100 meters so he can publicly post that 13 meters plus second time, because the back end of that race is going to fucking murder him. Sorry as well. This is semi-aggressive to you. I'm using you to facilitate this call out. If you could pass on that message to him, please. Sorry, you wouldn't even have anything to say to that.
No. I ran a 13-second hand time when I after I finished high school cross country, and people was like, "Oh, you should be fast." And I was like, "No, I am nowhere." I mean,
compared to the average Joe, most people are running 15. It sort of depends, because I think there's this thing where the average person, everyone thinks that they can dunk a basketball. I'm sure you've experienced that. Everyone thinks that they can run a sub 13 second 100. I'm yes, a lot of people can, but fuck, there is so much of the population that is so much slower than that.
Yeah, I run for the adaptations, not the performance. Okay, that's the code.
One last thing that I would like to ask you before we sort of cap off this, because that's been a fucking useful episode. There's I'm sprinting regardless. I want to be a faster runner. But then I notice it's a bit of a conversation in the dunking community. Is sprinting a really useful form of training to carry over for your approach jumping? What are your thoughts on that? And mainly stemming from, are you noticing much in the correlation between the speed of the approach and then the height of the jump? Or does it not seem like it's obviously a factor?
Yeah. So I'll start with this. It's when you run into a jump, you are nowhere close to your top speed. So in your actual approach, you're never, ever, ever limited by your top velocity, ever. even the best athletes, they are closer to like, or maybe it's not closer because they might also run faster. They are running faster in their approach compared to people that couldn't handle as much speed. But I wager that compared to how fast they can sprint, it's not nowhere close to top speed. It might be like
I've been thinking of running hard, but it's not like based on what you're saying.
It's telling you no, thank you.
No, it is. It's screaming no. Because I was fighting. I was like, you've got to fucking tell your body who's boss. Like, overcome this inhibition. But it was good feedback my body was giving.
Yeah. I mean, what happens when you run too fast is you don't jump, right? You just do a perfect, dynamically efficient linear deceleration, and you stay there. That's sort of what happens.
I do this. I put my plant leg down, and then the other leg never touches, and I just do the world's worst single leg horizontal jump.
Yeah, you do that. So that's in terms of the actual mechanics in the jumping movement itself, I don't think speed it's ever going to be the limiting factor for most people. Maybe ultimate freaks of the freaks, right? But in terms of training and adaptations, sure, why not, right? There's
to bring that ceiling up, yeah.
It's like GPP in the other direction. So I think it's still very good to do.
It's good form of power, yes.
Right, whatever power is supposed to be is good for that. And I think like it's honestly putting your limbs, lower limbs especially, through that much force during the ground contact. It gives some sense of preparation for what it could experience in a block, especially.
Both sides as well. Like that's the good thing about sprinting. Like it's like just single leg jumping constantly, right?
Right, but then you're gonna see people with different movements initially, like
up leg, down leg,
the up leg, down leg, whatever that's supposed to mean again. But it prepares you for that kind of impact, right? The duration of impact might not be as long, and certainly won't be as long compared to a block foot contact. But it's preparing you for high force contact on your forefoot. That you might not get the same in plyos. You might, but you might not.
Hell yeah. Fuck, that was a really useful episode. That is definitely going to change the way I approach jumping. I'm excited to turn that thing sideways in the driveway and not have to worry about, absolutely rolling the shit out of my ankle.
Paul Georging yourself, yeah.
You're so balls deep in the research. Well, when's your daily posting going to start? We're years away from that, aren't we?
Oh, it's honestly, you encouraged me to go on a posting spree a while back.
Yeah.
And I was focusing on getting my paper ready and prepped because my professor is super duper busy. So I try to really stay on top of like my work, especially I'm not bringing any money into the lab. Okay. It's really,
so you have to be ready to go.
So I take whatever advantage I can with my current opportunity to do as much as I can, learn as much as I can. So that's why I've just been, and the brains does get fried. Sometimes when I see like a cool NBA play, I can like quickly break it down and there'll be a content, lovely. And they actually do get quite a lot of views. I don't know. Maybe it's
good content. That's why, because people respect your opinion and you have a unique enough perspective on things that I think is like actually applicable and people get value. Do you know how sick it is to fucking just be scrolling Instagram? You're just chilling in bed or after dinner while you're digesting and learn something that's going to improve your training. Like, I just think it's, I know you want to do it. The one thing I just want to say, like, while I've got you here, it's like, find a way to just take us on the journey with you. Just share more about like what, and I know you got shit to do. But just more for us.
Yeah, of course.
It'd be awesome to be taken on more of the journey. But thank you for sharing some insights into it. Like I said, we'll get you back on because I think we could do a good hour on just how people are bastardizing physics on Instagram and things like that. Shout out your Instagram. And is there any other platform where you're active, your YouTube or anything?
Yeah, so Instagram is just Sam_likes_biomechanics. I thought about like a cockier title, but then I really don't want to be like someone that really, like Dr. something. And
biomechanics god.
Right. I don't want to be like the biomechanics guy, right? It's a bit too pretentious for me, but I think I always like biomechanics. wherever I end up being with it, I always like it. So, Sam likes biomechanics. That's where I am on Instagram. And then I have been jumping on the bandwagon of some longer form YouTube videos. So it's exactly the same. Sam likes biomechanics on YouTube, where I try to do some like a walk and talk to go through some topics. So that will start it up quite soon. It's more than like 45 seconds where I just discuss specific topics that pops up in the online training world. And also, I guess I might be the first. I don't think I'll be the first guest to do research, but I'll be the first to plug my research gate.
Oh yeah, because Lance didn't. I mean, Lance definitely published, but he didn't plug. Yeah, hell yeah.
So I do have 2 papers already out. So my research gate, you can see it on my link tree in my Instagram bio.
And we'll have Sam's link tree in our show notes. So you can just scroll down on whatever platform you're consuming this on, and there'll be a link for that down below so you can get access.
Yeah, so I have 2 papers out. They're both open access. One part is a professor saying, open science, we should really get the word out. And the other part is like, why don't people understand the biomechanics we do? Why don't people understand objectives? Why are researchers bastardizing biomechanics as well as, the rest of us? So they're open access. Feel free to give it a read and ask me the questions. One of the older paper in 2022 was not that good looking back, but the more recent one is getting better. And hopefully the next couple, I have 3 in the pipeline that I'm working on. So hopefully they'll be even better, and at least if anything, interesting. So yeah, so please check this out.
We always love that. And it's really, really hard to always give useful stuff. It's like, at the very least, if you can entertain people, that's a fucking win for me.
Correct. Yes.
Amazing. I'll talk to you next week.
If you're sick of going goblin mode on the same 4 accessory exercises at the end of every single session, head to the notes below and grab our free gymnastics program. It'll change the way you think about accessories forever.